Rain tapped gently against the kitchen window, its rhythm the only sound breaking the heavy silence of the night. A single bulb above the sink cast a tired yellow glow over stacks of unpaid bills and a half-drunk cup of cold coffee. Mark sat at the table, hunched over, calculator in hand, his brow furrowed in quiet frustration. The clock on the wall read 2:03 a.m. It had been 3 years since his wife passed, and every night since felt like a battle, one he fought in silence, alone but for the soft breathing of his sleeping daughter upstairs. The sudden ring of his phone startled him, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet like a blade. Unknown number. He stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello." A woman's voice answered, calm but trembling with urgency. "Mark Carter." He froze. "Yes. Who is this?" "You don't know me, but I need your help. Come to Ravenhill Manor." "Come alone." There was a pause. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but the call ended. Just like that. No name. No explanation. Just silence again. He sat motionless, phone still in his hand, heart beginning to thud with something between confusion and dread. Ravenhill Manor. The name stirred something in his memory. He couldn't place it immediately, but the unease was instant. He stood up slowly and walked to the counter, where a worn photo frame leaned against the tile backsplash. In it was a picture of his wife, smiling wide, holding their daughter in the garden. His fingers brushed over the glass. She used to work somewhere wealthy, somewhere secretive, but she never talked much about it. He looked toward the hallway where his daughter slept, peaceful and unaware. For a long moment, he just stood there, rain ticking louder against the glass. Logic said to ignore the call. But something else, something deeper, urged him forward. There was a tone in that woman's voice, a weight. Desperation wrapped in trust. She had known his name. Grabbing his coat and keys, Mark took one last look at the photo, then stepped out into the storm, the door clicking shut behind him. Whatever waited at Ravenhill Manor, he was already on his way. Mark's headlights cut through the thick fog as his car rolled slowly along the gravel drive. The air grew colder the closer he came to the estate, like the road itself had been untouched by time or warmth. Towering iron gates loomed ahead, already ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, as if expecting him. He hesitated, hand gripping the steering wheel, before driving through. Ravenhill Manor rose from the mist like a monument to forgotten grandeur. Ivy crawled across its crumbling stone facade, and shattered panes of stained glass glinted faintly in the dim light of the moon. Though beautiful, the place radiated neglect and sorrow, like a cathedral built for ghosts. Mark parked near the front steps, engine idling for a moment as he stared up at the vast structure. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant croak of a raven and the low whisper of the wind. He killed the engine, stepped out, and pulled his coat tighter. As he approached the door, it opened slowly with a long, reluctant groan. A woman stood just inside the threshold. She couldn't have been more than 30, tall, composed, and graceful in a long coat that swept the floor. But there was something in her posture, a tension, like a tightly coiled spring on the verge of snapping. Her hair, dark and pinned, framed a face pale with sleeplessness, her eyes sharp but haunted. "Mark Carter?" she asked, voice quiet but clear. "Yes," he replied, his tone guarded. "You called me?" She nodded once. "I'm Evelyn. Evelyn Ravenhill." The name landed like a quiet weight. Ravenhill. Heiress to the estate, and, if the stories were true, one of the last of the Ravenhill line. Mark's brow furrowed. "Why me?" Evelyn glanced past him into the fog before stepping aside. "You're the only one I could trust." There was no elaboration, no small talk. Her words carried urgency and fear, cloaked in poise. Mark hesitated only a moment more before stepping inside. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed down the long, dark hall. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The heavy doors of the library creaked open, revealing a cavernous room lit only by the flickering flames of wall-mounted candelabras. Shadows danced along floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with dusty tomes and leather-bound volumes that looked centuries old. A thick scent of old paper and candle wax lingered in the air. Mark stepped in cautiously, his boots muffled by a worn Persian rug that stretched across the oak floor. Evelyn moved ahead of him, silent, her figure lit by the soft glow of the candles. In the far corner of the room, an ornate desk sat beneath a massive oil painting of a man who looked stern and unforgiving, probably one of her ancestors. The eyes in the painting seemed to follow Mark as he walked. What caught his attention next were the tiny black dots along the trim of the ceiling, cameras, almost invisible unless you were looking. Mark narrowed his eyes. This place was being watched. Evelyn turned to face him near the desk. She looked tired now, more vulnerable than she had at the door. Without a word, she opened a small drawer and pulled out a worn photograph. She handed it to Mark. He took it, studying the image. A younger version of his wife stood beside a teenage Evelyn, both smiling in the sunlight. He felt the breath leave his lungs. "She worked here," Evelyn said softly. "As my governess. She protected me. She was the only person in this house who ever did." Mark looked up slowly, the photo trembling slightly in his hand. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" "Because she knew too much," Evelyn said, lowering her voice. "She found out about what my uncle did. About the money, the disappearances. She tried to go to the police. And then, she was gone. They said it was an accident. But I don't believe that anymore." Mark's fists clenched at his sides. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need your help," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "I've uncovered things, documents, footage. If I go public alone, they'll discredit me or worse. But if someone like you, someone outside the family, brings the truth forward, it might be enough." She looked him in the eyes. "I know it's a lot. But if your wife died trying to protect me, don't you want to know why?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was already turning into resolve. The air grew colder as Mark and Evelyn descended the narrow stone steps beneath the library. A torch in Evelyn's hand cast flickering light against the damp walls, revealing cobwebs and faded murals long forgotten. The passage twisted like a buried serpent beneath the manor, its silence broken only by their echoing footsteps and the distant sound of dripping water. "This was built during the war," Evelyn whispered. "My great-grandfather used it to hide valuables, and secrets." Mark didn't reply. He was focused, alert, his eyes scanning every corner. After what Evelyn had told him upstairs, he trusted no one, not even the shadows. At the end of the corridor stood a rusted iron door. Evelyn knelt beside it and produced a key from her coat. With a groan of old hinges, the door creaked open, revealing a small chamber lined with filing cabinets, lockboxes, and old crates. "There," she said, hurrying to one of the cabinets. "My father kept copies of everything. Contracts, bank transfers, legal documents. If what I found earlier was real, the rest should be here." Mark moved beside her, helping pull open drawers. Dust filled the air as papers shuffled, ledgers, letters, deeds. Then Evelyn froze. She reached into a folder and pulled out a small, sleek flash drive taped beneath a financial ledger. "This is it," she said, breath catching. "I think this holds everything." Before Mark could respond, a sharp click echoed behind them. They spun around. Standing in the doorway was Gerald Langston, the family's long-trusted legal advisor. His polished shoes and tailored coat looked absurdly clean for a place like this. But the gun in his hand was deadly real. "You shouldn't have come down here, Evelyn," he said calmly, aiming directly at her. "This was never your fight, Mark. Walk away." Mark stepped in front of her instinctively. "You killed my wife, didn't you?" Gerald's face didn't change. "She made a choice. And so did you. He fired. But Mark had already lunged. The shot rang out, ricocheting off the stone wall as they collided. The gun skidded across the floor. Evelyn screamed. A brutal struggle followed, grunts and shouts echoing in the small chamber. Mark managed to slam Gerald against the wall, knocking him unconscious with a final blow. Breathing hard, Mark grabbed Evelyn's hand. "We have to go. Now." Flash drive in pocket, they ran. Behind them, the hidden truths of Ravenhill shook in silence, waiting to surface. Dawn broke gently over the city skyline, casting golden light over the quiet streets as the first stirrings of morning began. Outside the precinct, police cars sat idle, their red and blue lights dulled under the rising sun. Inside, the air was tense but purposeful, a quiet storm of activity that signaled something big had just happened. Mark sat across from a detective, exhaustion written all over his face. His clothes were rumpled, his knuckles bruised from the scuffle, and a faint line of dried blood traced his temple. Still, his eyes were steady as he reached into his coat and pulled out the flash drive. "This," he said, placing it on the table, "is everything." The detective, a seasoned man with weary eyes, nodded without a word and passed it to the tech officer. Across the room, Evelyn sat surrounded by officers and legal aides. Her face was pale but calm as she gave her statement, her voice unwavering as she named names, uncles, board members, and finally, Gerald Langston. She didn't ask for protection. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply told the truth. By mid-morning, the precinct buzzed with confirmed arrests. Officers moved swiftly, warrants in hand, as years of corruption unraveled with surgical precision. Ravenhill Manor would be searched. The legacy of silence was finally crumbling. Outside, on the steps of the building, Mark sat with his daughter curled up in his lap. She had been brought in by a family friend hours earlier, sleepy and confused, her small arms wrapping tightly around her father's neck. As the sun warmed the steps, she stirred. "Daddy?" He looked down, smiling softly. "Hey, sweetheart." Evelyn appeared at the door and paused. For a moment, she just watched them, a quiet picture of everything she had longed for but never had. Then she stepped forward, her usual composure replaced by something softer. "Thank you, Mark," she said. He stood, holding his daughter in one arm as he extended the other. Evelyn took his hand and squeezed it gently. "What you did," she continued, "your wife would be proud." Mark nodded, emotion rising behind his eyes. "I just needed the truth." As Evelyn turned back inside to finish the process of reclaiming her name, Mark walked away into the light of morning. Not sure what came next, but certain of what truly mattered.